I have been a cheater. I mean, I've also been cheated on. But when I was a cheater, I had explanations at the time, like reasons that made sense to me on a surface level, but the real understanding came later. And what I now know is that it wasn't about lust. It never was. It was really, for me, a lack of fulfillment that I didn't have language for. It was something I was trying to get without knowing why or what. We have a particular story about affairs. Someone wants more of something, more passion, more excitement, more sex, and or someone newer. We think that affairs are about lust, about wanting something the relationship isn't providing. And sometimes that's true. A lot of the time it isn't, though. Hey, lovers. This is Sex in Real Life. Honest conversations about sex and relationships beyond 40. I'm your host, Stacey Herrera. Sometimes affairs are not about lust at all. They are about feeling lonely. And that distinction really matters because if we keep telling the lust story when the real story is loneliness, we keep solving for the wrong thing. Among adults over 45, roughly 15 to 20% of people who are partnered or married report feeling lonely. Not alone, lonely inside of a relationship. And that number is probably low because the loneliness that drives a lot of affairs is often the kind that people don't fully recognize in themselves. There is the loneliness you can point to. Someone is checked out or they're not showing up or they're just not there. And that is painful, but it's legible. You can name it, you can explain it, and someone else will understand exactly what you mean. And then there's this other kind. I was talking to my daughter about loneliness the other day, and she described loneliness as a lack of shared experience. So, not that the other person feels everything you feel or thinks everything you think, but they get it. When you say something, you know that it lands enough that you don't feel like you're talking to a wall. The insidious kind of loneliness is when that's missing and everything else looks fine. So the relationship looks intact on the outside. Needs are met, dinner happens, vacations, you sit together, you watch TV together, but you're still lonely and you can feel it, but you can't quite put it in words, not to yourself, maybe, and certainly not to your partner. I have felt like this in a relationship before. He wasn't absent, he was there, like meeting the basic needs, available for dinners and dates, present. He could pour himself entirely into his work. If it mattered to him, he could give it his full focus and real attention. But he couldn't really do that with me. And I don't think it was intentional. I think it's just something that happens in long term relationships where, you know, we probably should talk more honestly about this because when something is always there, you stop noticing it. It's not that you stop caring, but it gets filed away in your brain as known, safe, and accounted for. So sometimes it makes you feel like you are as much a part of the environment as the couch. You can sit in the same room and do a lot of the same things together, explore new things, sleep in the same bed, and still be completely invisible to each other. Not because the checkout is obvious, but there's no curiosity, but you're not fighting either, but you're not exactly happy. You're just not noticing. And how turned on can you really be by someone who isn't noticing you? I mean, seriously. I mean, sure, like I've said before, your body can respond because arousal is often just a response to stimulation. But that's not the same thing as lust or desire. Desire requires novelty, it requires newness, but it also requires, feeling seen, you know? And when that's gone, you can go through the motions. A lot of people go through the motions, but that's not the same as lust and is not desire. And sometimes one or both people can feel the difference. So when someone comes along who is attentive, who asks and waits for the answer, who responds in a way that tells you that what you're saying is being received, especially after a long stretch of feeling invisible, that's not lust. It might be relief. And it isn't always a conscious decision. Sometimes affairs are compulsive. And in worst cases, the affair will just run alongside the relationship, run alongside the partnership or the marriage indefinitely, because it becomes the one place where certain needs are being met. And, technically, what those people are doing is non-monogamy, but it's unethical because there's no agreement. And when the affair ends, if it ends, and the relationship remains, the loneliness will still be there. Sometimes it's just unchanged. It's just now a part of the dynamic because the affair was never addressing it. It was a workaround. It was a way to get needs met without ever having to get clear about what those needs were. And, the affair for some people is how they avoid getting clear about what they're really feeling. Because if you have to name it, if you have to sit with the fact that you're lonely in a relationship that looks fine, in a way that you can't really explain with someone who's technically there, that is so much harder to face than a secret that just keeps you fed enough to stick around, right? If you are experiencing the kind of loneliness that's not easy to put your finger on because all of the behaviors of a fulfilling relationship appear to be there, an affair is an easy way to not have to deal with what's really going on. It keeps you from asking the harder question, which is not about whether you should stay or go, or whether your partner is a good person, or whether the relationship can be repaired. The harder question is, what are you actually hungry for? And whether you have said that out loud to the other person you're with. This is not an accusation, it's just the truth. And I want to be clear about something. I am not making an excuse for cheating. Breaking an agreement with someone you're in a relationship with, whether that's spoken or unspoken, causes real harm. And that's not up for debate. What I am doing, though, is holding a lens to a different angle, because if the conversation only ever stays on the surface of who did what, who got hurt, who's to blame, we never get to the thing that's really causing all of this before you went and started looking in the first place. And that's worth examining. If this conversation landed for you, or if you recognize something, I would love it if you shared the episode. Post it, text it, pass it along. Follow the show so that new episodes show up in your feed. And if you're feeling inclined, and if it's true for you, a 5-star rating and a short review genuinely helps more people to find these conversations. Next week, we are going to talk about sexual frustration and why so much of it has nothing to do with sex at all. It's going to be good. I'll see you then. Ciao.